So we're talking about Michael Magee, and we have two poems we're looking at. Actually, one poem sequence called Pledge, and the other is a couple of instances from his book-length project, My Angie Dickinson. Let's talk about Pledge, first of all. Hey, Max, do you know the Pledge of Allegiance?
Yeah.
You do? Why do you know that?
Because we said it every day in school.
Did everybody say it every day?
No.
Mm-hmm. Emily, you went to a Quaker school.
I sure did.
And they don't do the Pledge of Allegiance. I did the Pledge of Allegiance during the Cold War. It was a serious matter. But I never did find out what it meant. Do you know what it means?
I didn't figure out what it meant until I had to learn it in French, oddly enough.
That's a very interesting experience.
You renew your allegiance to your country, to God.
Mm-hmm. Right? And how is it? What's the grammar? Can anyone scan that sentence? How does that work? It's a pretty complicated sentence. All right, we're going to do it together. Some of the people who are taking our course don't know the Pledge of Allegiance because, people who are in the United States typically do, and people who are not don't. They find it actually probably pretty strange. So let's do it together, except for Emily, who's a Quaker, who shall remain silent. Ready? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Max, tell me about those last lines. The last pieces of it. Under God, with liberty and justice.
They're all these qualifiers. They're just qualifying the republic.
It's a series of comma clauses.
Yeah.
It's a very strange sentence, but it is our sentence. Right? A little like the Declaration of Independence, which is a wonderful periodic 18th century sentence. Okay, so Mike Magee's pledge is, what does he do to the pledge?
He makes a homophonic translation of it.
A homophonic translation, what is that?
It means that he uses all the same sounds, but creates new words out of them. Mm-hmm. So I pledge allegiance becomes I plug elegance.
Okay, so he follows sound but not sense. Homophonic translation. What does the word translation mean in this? This is a postmodern favorite, homophonic translation. What does translation mean?
Well, usually translation preserves the semantic meaning, but here he chose a different element to preserve, which was
usually the point of translation is like Google Translation. You're going to Spain and you're going to encounter a sentence and you type it in and it comes out in semantic English. So the difference between please may I go to the bathroom and please may I pay for 2 tickets on this bus. They're different. They serve different utilities. There's no utility here. Is there a utility to the Pledge of Allegiance? Whatever it is, we may have forgotten it. Most people have forgotten it because they've turned it into a poem of the sort that nobody remembers. So I'll read the first one. I plug elegance to thief rag off Dionysus tastes of America. In tune theory public for widgets hands, one day shun, on dirge odd, ring the busy bell with lip hurting, and just this for all. 2. Hype ledge a lesion to death egg, oft die you nightly stains of a miracle, and too deep repugnant for withered spans, wan etching, unnerved dog, inapplicable with liver tea, and just this for all. What's liver tea? I have no idea. There must be something. I don't know what it is. My friend Stephen, tofuti bag. Gosh, what a phrase. Tofuti bag. Over mitt lighted stinks of a measuring cup. And tutoring Bobby for 50 clams. 50 claims. I think it's actually supposed to be clams, as in dollars. For 50 clams, 1 eggplant undercooked and uneatable with liverwurst. And just this for all. Emily's having fun. I planned a neat myth, today's rags, ugly unified fates never heard of you. And 10 and 3 cap colonies, that would be the 13 colonies of the United States, or 50 nifty states, coronation, underground, into mythical, palabricity, and justice for all. Emily, why are you laughing? What pleasure? What pleasure?
It's just a sort of sly and, I think, innocuous way to mock something which has this sort of stale incrustation of sort of symbolic.
Innocuous. It's not unpatriotic. It's not really political because.
The amount of having fun is unpatriotic.
Really, one could say that it's super patriotic. How so?
It's still invoking, right, the Pledge of Allegiance, and it's granting it the importance that any act of sort of artistic creation grants something.
It also kind of, I feel like, makes you maybe even more conscious of what the original language was.
Exactly. It's reminding you of what it means by creating that translated difference. It's sort of like you in what country were you in when you France?
I was here, but I was learning it in French.
You were learning it in French and it made you realize what the English meant. We have naturalized language, and this is a pre-Flarf postmodern attempt, a homophonic translation to try to get us to understand the pledge. Or maybe it's a mock of the fact that a lot of American citizens run around saying this thing that they don't understand. And that would probably be true of the Star Spangled Banner, one of the weirdest little poems, long poems put into music that there is. I don't even know the words probably. So now let's turn to My Angie Dickinson. This is a Flarf project. This is a project that occurs after the creation of Flarf. This is very self-consciously Flarfy. Anybody can define Flarf? What's that?
It's a poem made from Google searching something.
That's one of the strategies for Flarf, but Flarf more generally.
It kind of came out of the desire to write the worst poem possible.
Mm-hmm, it did.
So it was Gary Sullivan, right?
Gary Sullivan. Mm-hmm.
Who went to submit a poem to like poetry.com and basically tried to make the worst poem that he could possibly make. So because the idea was that poetry.com would basically respond to you and say like, oh, we love your poem, we'll definitely publish it for like this ridiculous amount of dollars.
Right.
So he was trying to like maybe make the statement that there's no way that they would publish the worst poem ever.
So a
And they
group
did.
of people who wanted to take this particular postmodern stand, which is not a language poetry stand and not a conceptualist stand, although it's somewhat related to conceptualism, really a kind of deliberate kitschiness, a quality of intentional or unintentional flarfiness, a kind of corrosive, cute or cloying awfulness, wrong or un-PC, out of control, not okay. So My Angie Dickinson is can you describe how he's worked this out? How does it work? Amaris?
Well, first of all, he took the name Angie Dickinson and plugged that into Google.
Who's Angie Dickinson?
She was an actress, I believe, who came out in a number of very well-known pieces.
Pieces is a very fancy word for Angie Dickinson. Angie Dickinson was when I came of age and knew who Angie Dickinson, she'd become a kind of blonde bombshell who kind of did fine as she aged. I mean, just one of these really powerful B-film, B-TV show actresses. She was a friend of the Rat Pack. Any Rat Packers? Who's in the Rat Pack?
Sammy Davis
Sinatra.
Jr.
Frank Sinatra, Sammy Davis Jr., Peter Lawford, and so forth. She was one of the women who hung around with them. She was in the original film Ocean's 11. You get the picture. She's a kind of kitsch Zelig in American popular culture of the 60s and 70s. She was policewoman in a 1970s TV show. Sergeant Suzanne Pepper was her name. Yeah. Anyway, so he takes Angie Dickinson and does what with it? Amaris, I cut you off. So.
And then he takes select phrases from Emily Dickinson poems, adding that to the Google keyword search. And then the results he then organizes into
He's
poems.
using Google to create a poem, to help create a poem. Why?
It adds a sort of arbitrariness to it, but also Google is renowned for coming up with the most popular and thus the flarfiest results.
Right, so popular, middle-brow, kitschy, but also that somehow fits with Angie Dickinson. So it's kind of like a redundancy. Typing Angie Dickinson into Google is like get Google. You know, I mean, Google sort of lives to reproduce bits of Angie Dickinson. Yeah. So anyway, and he took pieces of Emily Dickinson. So what's the relationship between Emily Dickinson and Angie Dickinson?
Wonderful.
Max?
Aside
I'm sorry,
from the-
Emily Max?
Aside from the pun on the name, that's sort of a convenient sort of homophonic pun for him there.
The differences
My
between
Angie
Emily
Dickinson.
Dickinson and Angie Dickinson are, among them, are
Like
Emily.
polar cultural opposites of incredibly sort of tacky public persona and sort of sublimely private, introverted artist.
Okay.
But at the same time, they're both strong, intelligent women.
Who do what that's the same? Who do what that's the same? This is tough because, you have to know your Angie Dickinson, but what could possibly be, I mean, we have to respect the fact that Emily is ultimately right about this, but what could possibly be able...
Performance, artistry of a kind,
Well, they're women and they're tough.
iconic.
Yeah,
A
they're women,
feminist
and
agenda.
so a feminist reading of Angie Dickinson is a very for a Flarf guy to be doing is a very interesting project. And this project was much praised. I mean, Ron Silliman praised this to the skies, and as a language poetry guy, although very open-minded, was not expected to be praising Google search poems. So let's look at a couple of poems, one very briefly and one a little more closely, from my Angie Dickinson. So let's get the parts right. We've got Emily Dickinson's prosody and form. We've got Angie Dickinson pop cult content, and we've got Google searching as a means of getting content and doing what with it in the prosody? What's the process? What's happening? Ron Silliman says, Magee's poems replicate the start, stop, stutter, step movement central to Dickinson's prosody, but through this sonic veil, we get glimpses of a world that is sharply etched, celebrity-ridden, but also more than a little dangerous. What's the sonic veil? How would you describe that, Allie? What's a sonic veil here?
Well, it's kind of the mold of, the meter and the
But
form.
veil, it's good, but veil is a different metaphor, right, than mold. Max?
Veil covers something, right? So it's what we encounter first. So when we see these with all the dashes, and when we read through them, we sort of get immediately this Dickinson style that we're already familiar with.
Disruptive, fragmented prosody and mode, grammatically and otherwise, done with Angie Dickinson content via Google. I mean, it is the most unlikely. It's a conceptual project in that sense, and it produces results that Ron Silliman and others have said is a way of getting back to the original radicalism and disruptiveness of Emily Dickinson at a time when what had happened? What had happened to Dickinson, according to Mike Magee?
Well, kind of generations of literary critics had sort of smoothed her out and kind of taken away.
It made her somewhat pious, brought out the ballad quality in her, the sing-songy quality.
Which I guess then Susan Howe attempted with her My Emily Dickinson. She pushed back against that. And then I feel like this takes it even another step forward.
So Susan Howe, whom we talked about earlier in the course, chapter 9.1, takes the Dickinsonian legacy and returns it to its coarseness, its disruptiveness, its radicalism, and its power in a book called My Emily Dickinson. And here is Mike Magee calling his book My Angie Dickinson, which is not a repudiation of what Howe has done, but a way of honoring Howe in his own flarfy way. Okay, so this is a pretty cool project, I think. So let's look at one poem quickly and then another poem a little more closely, and then we'll wrap up. So number 25 in the sequence. Why the numbers?
That's how Emily numbered her poems.
Yeah, Emily numbered her poems. And he uses, I'm doomed, I'm doomed. I mean, this is something that Dickinson did for several of her poems, her sexy poems. Oh, yes. Yes, Emily Dickinson. We didn't look at her sexy poems. Maybe we should have. Oh, dream maker, a fateful and fatal sexual encounter. Bored femme Godzilla. That's not a line you'd get in Emily. Why?
It's a pop culture reference.
Godzilla certainly is, yes. After Emily's time, I'm sure. Bored femme Godzilla, an unbilled bit done with no dialogue, done with his. It's almost like Angie thinking about filming. I looked at myself, capital M, and thought, capital T, geez, not bad. A nun with a big heart. Which hat? Plaid. Okay, I don't know how you're going to close read this, so don't. But say something. Say something. Molly, say something. What's the feeling it gives you?
It's very strange. It's very it ends sort of casually, a little more personally than Dickinson ever got.
Oh, I don't know. I think Dickinson, we just didn't read those poems. Mike Magee likes the poems nobody reads, the poems of Dickinson nobody reads. But yeah, she will often just give you a quoted phrase at the end, not which hat plaid, but what's she doing, Max, in the mirror there that's different, that's maybe not Dickinsonian?
She's judging herself based on how she thinks that she would be judged. So I look at myself and think, yeah, it's not so bad. Like people will like me, and I can go out there.
Well, I
and-
think Angie Dickinson's saying a whole lot more than that. You know, not only am I not bad, but I'm
Oh,
wow.
it's more like
look
a,
at
"Geez,
me.
not bad."
Geez, not bad. Let's look at 21 and do a slightly closer reading of it. Now, this is really difficult, but it is so Dickinsonian. Stars from two vastly different spheres. Orbmaster creates orbs. Feathers saves the day. She rides from fireballs to PB&J. Down a flight, in quotes, of stairs. Immobile sperm raids down. Soft, muted spheres pressed into. Ideology saxophones. Go, Amaris, say something.
I think multiple things are happening here. So first of all, I think he's making fun of the architectural vocabulary that we noted in Emily Dickinson. And then secondly, commenting on her writing process as this woman with incredible powers of composition. She's the orb master in this poem, mixing the genius of thinking about all these like heavy concepts with consciousness. With the ideology saxophones at the end, maybe it's like the musical quality of language, but it has this sort of mocking domestic quality to it with the PB&J.
Wow,
So I don't.
that's pretty good.
I love the fireballs PB&J juxtaposition.
Yeah.
That makes me really happy.
And where, from what to what? From fireballs to PB&J.
Fireballs, like this like cosmic cosmos
From power, energy,
You know,
cosmology,
and
to
snack.
snack. From sublime to ridiculous. From primordially
ridiculous?
creative
Who's that
energy
ridiculous
to
about PB&J?
quick calorie packed lowbrow snack. 20th century snack. Good. What about these ideology saxophones? We'll finish there. What about that? Anybody see immobile sperm? How does immobile sperm, it's kind of an awful image, raining down. Yeah, it's so Angie Dickinsonian. Down a flight of stairs, immobile sperm rains down, soft muted spheres. Suddenly the cosmology has become soft and maybe milky. This is a celestial milk. Pressed into ideology saxophones. Does anybody see how ideology saxophones might function?
I see it on the PB&J as a consumer snack food, and then we get to ideology saxophones. Ideology almost sounds like propaganda through megaphones, through saxophones.
A certain kind of Rat Pack B movie jazziness. Yeah, but I also see, and I'm going to be the disgusting, the kitschy one here. But when you take sperm raining down and you press it, what does a saxophone look like? Oh, I'm the only one who thinks
Not
like
sure I'm
this.
following you.
Oh, well, you don't. I think I'll leave it to
Valid
the imagination. Let's say something general and wrap up. Okay, so Mike, you're still shaking your head at the pressed sperm into saxophones.
Yeah.
Okay. You just don't. It's that Quaker school. You just don't have the same imagination. Okay. Yeah. You had the advantage of not having to say the Pledge of Allegiance, but there's a lot of disadvantages. I mean, you have to have Amaris with you to read my Angie Dickinson clearly as a guide. Okay, say something about what Mike McKee's doing and possibly about the relationship between this project, this Flarfy project, and the larger conceptual movement we've been talking about this week. So, Max, say something wise.
Well, as Anna said earlier, he's really taking Susan Howe's project to the next level, and he's showing how this verse form, Dickinson's style, is actually utterly modern, and how appropriate it is for issues even today for talking about not just as Dickinson talked about, things from her time or really like her own situations, domestic situations, but he's talking about big cultural problems and issues using the same sort of stuttering, fragmented verse, and it's working well.
Nice.
There's also
Alex?
something about an interesting contrast, or maybe even similarity between pop culture and then the kind of pop culture of poetry. And Emily Dickinson is one of the kind of, she's definitely in the core of what she's definitely a mainstream poet like at this time.
She's become mainstream. Yeah.
And so it's kind of just an interesting comment on the difference between, pop culture and how it resonates within a smaller sphere.
I really like, thank you, I really like the way that this piece in the last section of our last chapter brings us back to Emily Dickinson so that we can remember the Dickinson who is wild and radical. And I'll just conclude by quoting Michael Magee, who says that his intention here was to evoke in his own readership the combination of shock, bewilderment, excitement, pleasure, a process of disorientation and reorientation, that I, Mike Magee, imagine Dickinson's earliest readers must have felt when reading her work. So in a way, he's attempting with his conceptualist mode to reawaken that surprise and shock that we have really forgotten when we look at Dickinson. So this is a restoration of early pre-modern radicalism.